تیری خبر مٹانے والے، خلد میں احمد مرسل کو رلانے والے، میں انصاف سے دیکھے تو زمانے والے، کیسے ہوتے ہیں محمد کے گھرانے والے، زہر پیتے ہیں گلا تیغ سے کٹواتے ہیں، قبر میں جا کے بھی آرام نہیں پاتے ہیں، قبر میں جا کے آرام نہیں پاتے ہیں۔ صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد۔
اور محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔ سجاد سے صدمائے اٹھایا نہیں جاتا، سجاد سے صدمائے اٹھایا نہیں جاتا، بازار میں پھپھیوں کو پھرایا نہیں جاتا، سجاد سے صدمائے اٹھایا نہیں جاتا، کوئی ذرا جا کے سرے شبیر سے کہہ دے، کوئی ذرا جا کر سرے شبیر سے کہہ دے، زنداں میں سکینہ کو سلایا نہیں جاتا، بچے کو چھپا دیتے ہیں ننھی سی لحد میں، سر کاٹ کے نیزے پہ اٹھایا نہیں جاتا، کچھ مادر اصغر کو نظر آتا ہے وینا، کچھ مادر اصغر کو نظر آتا ہے وینا، جھولا کبھی خالی تو جھلایا نہیں جاتا، اولاد تمہاری بھی ہے ظالم سے یہ کہہ دو، اولاد تمہاری بھی ہے ظالم سے یہ کہہ دو، بچے پہ کبھی تیر چلایا نہیں جاتا، بچوں کو بہت پیار سے سمجھاتے ہیں شمر، بچوں کو تماچوں سے ڈرایا نہیں جاتا، سجاد سے صدمائے اٹھایا نہیں जाता और मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
Just quick announcement before Maulana start the Majlis is about next week, inshallah. Next week, Majlis on Friday and today. Tomorrow time is about same, about 7:20, but next week it'll be starting around 7:15. And we also have a Majlis for ladies tomorrow in the center around 12:30, and we have a speaker, sister speaker coming from Detroit, Michigan to do the Majlis tomorrow, inshallah. So please, all the sisters, try to come to the Majlis. Majlis will be in English as usual for our winter programs. So again, tomorrow Majlis start at 7:23, right after Maghrib prayers, next around 7:15.
If you could please recite a Surah Al-Fatiha for the Isala Sawab of Hajj Zainullah Masumi bin Musa Khan. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وفوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من شر الوسواس الخناس صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد. For the love of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد. And for the hastening of the reappearance of Imam Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: why does evil exist? Keep this question in the back of your mind. I want to give you a scenario. The scenario is at one moment in time, you find a man who is of Christian faith, who has the belief of Christianity, approach his house of worship, that is the church, in one dimension, in one paradigm. And at the exact same time, you have someone who is a Jewish man or somebody who is a Muslim man approaching their house of worship, either the synagogue or the mosque. And as the Christian man approaches the church, he has a hat that he has on his head. As he enters into the church, he does something. He removes his hat. This happens at one paradigm. At the same time, the Jewish man or the Muslim man who is entering into the synagogue or the mosque, they are entering into their synagogue and mosque, but they are placing a hat on their head. The Jewish man is putting a yarmulke on his head. The Muslim man is putting a kufi cap, for example, on their head. Why? They both want to show something. They both, if you ask the your hat before entering church, and you ask the Jewish man or the Muslim man, why did you put on a cap before you entered into the house of worship? Before you entered into the synagogue? Before you entered into the mosque? Why? If you ask the Christian man, he'll say, I did it out of respect. Out of respect for the church, out of respect for God. If you ask the Jewish man, if you ask the Muslim man, he'll tell you the exact same thing. I did that out of respect for God, out of respect for the institution. How is it possible for two individuals, not two individuals, two major religions of the world, paradigms, to show and have one similar goal, but have different means of going about that? The end is the same, respect. But the way they get about it is very different. Keep this scenario in the back of your mind. One of the biggest questions when we come to Western philosophy, as Muslims and as people of faith living in the West in particular, as we face, is the question of why does evil exist? This has been one of the biggest questions that has left people in perplexion and has left them to leave the religion at all. Whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam, in the West, many people have come forward and said that we cannot reconcile this issue of why does evil exist, and because we cannot reconcile this issue, therefore we do not believe. We as followers of the Ahlul Bayt in particular must be able to give answers to these questions so that we have our next generation and our current generation have a strong foundation of belief, and so that they can pass this on to the future generation. So number one, I want to look at number one tonight. What is this problem of evil, and why is it a problem in Western philosophy? What are the dimensions of it? Let's define the problem. Number two, does this problem exist around the world, or is this problem found in particular parts of the world and not found in other parts of the world? What is the relationship of Islam with respect to the question of evil? What words or what terms does the Quran al-Majid wa Furqan al-Hamid use with respect to what we may call evil? And how does it relate to us? And number five, I want to look at how did the question of evil relate to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala? And finally, I want to look at the life of Imam Sajjad, and how the question of evil related to him, and what was his solution to the problem, and how we can embed these solutions in our lives. And I want to turn to the tragedy of Karbala and also the aftermath of Karbala through the eyes of Imam Sajjad tonight. This is our schedule for the evening, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. With respect to the question or the problem of evil, in Western philosophy, this is a paramount discussion in Judaism, in Christianity, about how is it possible that a God that has three fundamental attributes can allow evil to exist. What are these three fundamental attributes? The argument comes forward. The first attribute is that God is omnipotent. Omnipotent. Omni meaning all, potent meaning powerful. Omnipotent meaning God has ability to do everything. He is all powerful, number one. Number two, this God is also omniscient. Omniscient meaning omni, all knowing. All knowing. Number three, this God is omnibenevolent, meaning all good. A God that is all powerful, all knowing, and all good, meaning that God knows what's going to happen, God has the ability to change what's going to happen, and God is all good. How can this God allow for evil to exist in our world? What does evil mean? Does evil mean, for example, drinking alcohol? With respect to our discussion here, we're not talking about that. And I invite those people who may have Islamophobic tendencies, those people outside these walls who may say that Islam is a violent religion, to read the history of Islam. You will find the tolerance of Muslim civilizations throughout history has been more than many other civilizations. If you look at the history of, for example, the Persian Empire, there were, for example, under the Muslim rule, there were wineries that you would find in Persia. In fact, you would find stables of pigs within there. Why? Because Islam said we do not impose our view on you. If you are a Christian, if you are a Jew, you have your belief. You are entitled to believe what you want to believe. We do not impose our belief on you. Yes, this Islamic empire, there are some rights and some regulations. So we're not talking about relative evil here. Because the Muslim may say, I say alcohol is evil. The Christian will say, I don't believe that. For me, it's not. So we are talking about not that type of relative evil. We are talking about suffering, for example. Why does that child who's 5 years old have to go through cancer, for example? Why does hunger and famine have to exist in the world? Why do people die of starvation? These are the questions that we're looking at. How does this exist in the presence of God? We must have answers to these questions. How do I answer this? How do I reconcile this? So the question goes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Almighty, has the power, has the knowledge, has all goodness, and yet He sees that child who's suffering. He knows it's going to happen. He has the power to change it, and He's all good, therefore He should change it. This is how the argument goes. In Western philosophy, many times this leads people to leave faith. But I want to bring your attention to a reality. This question only exists in Western philosophy. It doesn't exist in Eastern philosophy. When you look at experts who look at this question, experts of religion, they are perplexed as to why does this question exist in the West and not in the East? Why does it exist in Europe? Why does it exist in America? Why doesn't it exist in, for example, not only Muslim civilizations? It doesn't exist in China. It doesn't exist in India. It doesn't exist in the Muslim Gulf. There's no person in Cairo, for example, who is feeding a family of 15. He goes home as a taxi driver. He comes home and says, I have to feed 15 mouths and life is so difficult. He doesn't say, because of this, I disbelieve in God. Why is it that that person doesn't disbelieve in God? Whereas here, if there's suffering, if there's difficulty, the person looks forward and says, I don't believe in God because of this. We must examine this. In Western philosophy, here's how the argument goes. Please bear with me on this very delicate point in the next few moments. In Western philosophy, the argument goes that God created the universe. Because God created the universe and God is all good, therefore, this universe should not have evil in it. And because evil exists in this world, therefore God is either not all good, or He's not all knowing, or He's not all powerful. This is a problem that Einstein and many intellectuals in the West faced. Here is how the argument goes in Eastern philosophy, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Islam, and other major religions. The argument goes as follows, in particular in Islam. God created the universe. Creation implies separation. When I create something, that something is not me. For example, I create this mimbar. If I, Shabir, create this mimbar has a certain length, a certain width, a certain height, a certain weight. This mimbar is a creation of mine. It is not me. In the Western philosophy, what happens is creation and creator get conflated, one on top of the other. They become the same. Whereas in Eastern philosophy, it is understood that creation implies separation. That separation, that when man descended from the heavens, when Adam was sent from the heavens to earth, that separation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the all goodness, that will be something that is very different than an all merciful God. That means our world is destined to have difficulty, because pleasure and all goodness only exists in the realm of subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is where heaven comes into the equation. We understand that as followers of the Ahlul Bayt and followers of Islam, this world will have difficulties. It will have trials, because this world is separate from God. What you and I, this is number one. Number two, what you and I call evil is that manifestation of the separation from heaven to this world. That separation, we call it evil. What do I mean we call it evil? Let me give you an example. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I understand this is a bit philosophically and intellectually dense, but believe you me, from the bottom of my heart, we have lost and we are losing many people in our next generation because these fundamental issues have not been addressed. Understanding Western philosophy, understanding Eastern philosophy, and understanding the Islamic perspective. The example goes as follows. You've seen the Mona Lisa. You may have heard of this artwork, very famous in Paris, the Louvre, by Leonardo da Vinci. Roughly 500-year-old painting. Today in our modern world, many people come forward and they'll make puzzles out of this. You may have seen this. They'll take the Mona Lisa and they'll break it up into many different pieces, and then your job is to build this puzzle up again. When you build this puzzle up again, it ultimately becomes the Mona Lisa. But if you take one individual piece of the puzzle, what do you see? When you pick up one individual piece of the puzzle, you may see something that's brown or discolored or black. It doesn't make sense. But when you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, then you see the entire picture. Analogously, you and I, what we call evil in our world is us not understanding the whole picture and judging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom based on one angle of the equation, one piece of the puzzle. Another very interesting example for those who may be scientifically inclined is from a book that is called Flatland. It's almost 100 years old. A very interesting book I recommend you all read. And the book talks about what would happen if we go from one dimension to another dimension to another dimension. So this would I will remind you a little bit about some mathematics. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is extremely important because somebody may come forward and say to me in this modern era that why did Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam have to go through the difficulty he went through? Why did he see his family suffering? Why did he lose his loved ones? Why did his children suffer? That evil happened on Allah's watch. Allah had all knowledge. Allah had all power. Allah is all good. Allah didn't stop it. Therefore, I don't believe. Believe me, we're hearing these narratives. I'm giving the answer to that question. Why? Flatland, one dimension. What's one-dimensional space? A line. Point A to point B. Point A, point B, you draw a line, that's one dimension. What's two dimensions? X and Y coordinate system. Descartes, you remember the Cartesian system? X and Y, you plot that. A simple example is a flat piece of paper. Piece of paper. That is a flat two-dimensional space. What's three dimensions? X, Y, Z. Ahsantum. What does that look like? Our world. We live in a three-dimensional world. Think of a box. You know a box? Cardboard box. It has three dimensions. Three dimensions. Now, imagine for a moment that you live in a two-dimensional world. For our youth, you know the video games that you play? Super Mario, Tetris? That's a two-dimensional world. Tetris is maybe a bit dated. Nonetheless, you live in a two-dimensional world. If you lived in this two-dimensional world, what would you see? How would your world be? Remember, you don't have three dimensions, you have two dimensions. Imagine for a moment, here's the kicker. Imagine for a moment that you are living in a two-dimensional world, in the world of Super Mario, in the world of Tetris, in the world of that flat piece of paper. And I take my three-dimensional finger and I place it in the two-dimensional world. I take my three-dimensional finger and I place it in your two-dimensional world. What will you see? If you're living in that two-dimensional world, what will you see? You will see a flesh-colored line. You will see a line that is the color of my finger. Why will you not see my whole finger? Because my finger has a third dimension that your world doesn't have. You see? For me, living in that two-dimensional world, I will see a flesh-colored line. So one of these pillars, for example, one of these arcs, that would be what I see. And let's say I give that a name. I say that arc, I'm going to call it evil. You see, we are judging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's system having incomplete knowledge. We live in three-dimensional space. What does four dimensions look like? Does anyone know what four dimensions look like? We have no idea what four dimensions look like. We cannot fathom. Yet the mathematics, string theory, physics, it all shows that our world has 9 or 11 or 13 dimensions. We can't visualize it. We don't know what it looks like. But the mathematics works out. The point that I'm getting at, and this is what Flatland talks about, that you and I, we are assessing and trying to play the role of God without having the full picture in place. We live in a three-dimensional world. There are many other dimensions to the equation that you and I may not be looking at, yet we are making judgment. You understand the God complex? Have you heard of the God complex? The God complex is this idea that if I can understand one complicated system, I can understand every complicated system. For example, I understand the human body. If I can understand the human body, I can understand financial systems. I can understand management. Or the same with someone, for example, who's an entrepreneur. They build this huge business. They think that they can build, if they build one business, they can build anything. There's a joke that goes with respect to this. What's the difference between God and a neuroscientist? I hope there's no neuroscientists here, by the way. What's the difference between God and a neuroscientist? God doesn't think he's a neuroscientist. The idea being that the neuroscientist thinks that He's God. You and I must be humble in terms of our knowledge and understanding and the limitations of it. I will illustrate this with an example. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I was listening to NPR one day when I was driving, NPR, National Public Radio, and an interesting discussion came on. It was a family, a couple from upstate New York. They're from New York, from the tri-state area. Very wealthy couple, husband and wife. And they had a child who was Down syndrome. The child was born with Down syndrome. And they had spent and dedicated their life to building institutions for children with Down syndrome after the birth of their child. For poor families who had children with Down syndrome, they said they created schools and institutions for them throughout the tri-state area. When they did this, journalists asked them a very interesting question. The question the journalist asked them was, can I ask you the following question? They said, ask away. What's the question? They said, the journalist said to the parents, if you had an option, if you had a choice, would you have this child again with Down syndrome? It's a very audacious question. It's a very courageous question that a journalist asked. Because imagine a parent who has a child like this. The response is very interesting. The response that the parents gave was, for the sake of this child, we would never want the child to have Down syndrome again. Because we don't want our child to suffer. We don't want our child to suffer. But they said, for our sake, we would want this child to have Down syndrome again. The journal said, what? How? For your sake, you want something else. For the child's sake, you want something else? For the child's sake, no way. For your sake, definitely. Why? They said, we believe that this child with Down syndrome has made us softer hearted, more loving, more compassionate, more caring. And if we didn't have this child, we would not empathize and care like for all those other children who are born with Down syndrome and all those other families who have children that are born Down syndrome. We would not build institutions for them. This child has been a blessing in our lives in order to make us soft-hearted and in order to make us spend our money and our wealth on good in society. Rather, we would have been using our money to buy boats and yachts and all these things that we may not need. But we used our money for good. The idea being, you and I, we may perceive something as evil. We may think something is suffering. But when we look at the grand scheme and the picture that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has completed, then and only then do we understand the entire picture. When we come to the issue within Islam, what is Islam's perspective on the issue of evil, on the issue of suffering, on the issue of trial? The Quran al-Majid wa Furqan al-Hamid, it uses two terms with respect to what you and I may call evil. The first term is shar. Min sharr al-waswas al-khannas. Shar is that evil which is induced by man, which is created, man-made creation. The other term that the Quran uses is ibtila. What is ibtila, Ibrahim? Ibtila is a sort of a test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives an individual to help them reach a level of kamal, a level of perfection, in order to raise their darajat and levels. With respect to shar, it's very clear. There are elements of our society that are evil, and that evil is caused by man. What's an example of this? It was in all of the press. This is something that's very well known. In NPR, CNN, all the top media outlets presented this. In 1967, in America, 1967, the sugar lobby in America paid off Harvard Medical School, the researchers at Harvard Medical, to do what? They paid them $50,000 to do what? They paid them $50,000 to say, we don't want you to research the negative impact of sugar on the heart. We want you to focus on fat. Do you know what implications that has? What that ends up doing, because Harvard Medical is what other institutions look at. So for 50 years, researchers were not looking at what negative impact sugar can have on the heart. They were focusing on fat. Why? Because one lobby paid them off. Furthermore, why do we use, I'm just coming back from the UK, why do we use high fructose corn syrup so much? They don't use it there. There's no argument health-wise to use it. There's no economic argument. The only argument is political because of that lobby being organized. People suffer because of it. People suffer from diseases because of it. Whose fault is this? Is that Allah's fault? That is the shar that the Quran is talking about. Shar that is created by man. Furthermore, do you know clothing in our world? Certain brands burn their product, Louis Vuitton and the likes. You'll never see a sale at those companies, by the way. When their products are no longer usable, they burn them. Now, mashallah, they've done brilliant marketing. You know what they say? Oh, we're doing reusable energy. We're burning the products to create reusable energy. The idea being that in our world, there is evil that exists due to the fact that it's man-made. The same way, when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was on the plains of Karbala, it was very clear that that evil that he was facing, the suffering that he was facing, that was all man-made by the means of Yazid bin Muawiyah. Umar ibn Sa'd, who was the general. These people were the essence of evil. Question that emerged here. They asked the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, how is it possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of the evil that Yazid ibn Muawiyah did or Umar ibn Sa'd did, that evil, it was for a specific time. How is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to send them to hell forever? It's a good question. Maybe they would repent. Maybe they ask for forgiveness. The answer came back that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us through the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He gave Yazid ibn Muawiyah 1,000 years, He would continue in his mischief the same way. He would continue in his shar the same way. He would not repent. Therefore, the eternal hellfire. There are answers to the big questions, my dear brothers and sisters. You and I must be cognizant and mindful. Therefore, the Quran says, one aspect of evil is shar. That is man-made. That is the evil that people create in society. Number one. Number two is what is called ibtila. Ibtila is a test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives His creation in order to help them get to a higher status. What's an example of this? An example of this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a test to Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. For example, He tests Nabi Ibrahim that after so many years he has a son. And once he has a son, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands him to sacrifice the son. And after he passes this test, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we made Ibrahim an imam. That means that through passing the test, Ibrahim's level increased. The same thing with Nabi Musa alayhi salam, Nabi Isa alayhi salam, even Rasulullah Azam. Now, sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, a very interesting question that comes here is, do the Ahlul Bayt, do our imams go through ibtila? Meaning, do the imams go through a test that raises their darajat? Because you and I know the imam is born an imam. Whether it's Imam Amir al-Mu'minin or Imam Hassan or Imam Hussein, they're all born imams. It's only once their father, for example, passes away that they take on the mantle of imamah. They were imams, they were the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first of creation was Rasulullah. And from Rasulullah, the light and the nur of Amir al-Mu'minin branched off. And then the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam were formed. So they are already born imams. But the question emerges, do they raise in darajat or not? This question was asked by Shaheed al-Sadr. And he answers this question very interestingly. Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. By the way, to understand the position of Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, many of our scholars in the Hawza who are maraja today, in private, they have stated that, for example, if Shaheed al-Sadr was alive, they would not declare their marja'iyah. He was on this level of knowledge. Sometimes people would not even understand because of this level of knowledge. Do you know what sacrifices, by the way, a small tangent. Do you know what sacrifice he went through? You know, we sometimes think that Shiaism went through sacrifices very long ago. This was in the 80s. Shaheed al-Sadr and his blessed sister, Sayyidah Aminatul Huda. Saddam tied them both up together, back to back. Back to back, huh? And he began to beat Shaheed al-Sadr's sister, Amina bintul Huda. And Shaheed al-Sadr saying that, let me go, loosen me up, fight me man to man, fist to fist. Why are you striking my sister? And he continued to beat her to the point that he didn't stop and he kept him tied. until the moment that he took the own gun himself and he shot both of them. We don't realize sometimes what price Shiaism and our scholars have gone through to get Shiaism to you and I. It's not a cheap price. I've told you before and I'll tell you again. There were times in the history of Baghdad that they would not erect a wall, they would not build a wall until they would drain the blood of a Sayyid Hassani in the cement. We use water to mix the cement. They would use blood. They would close a Sayyid Hassani who was alive in between two walls. You and I need to treasure what we have. I just came back from the UK. I met a brother who told me he was in, for example, you know that in the history of Tashayyu', the history of Shiaism, many times because of this persecution, the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, in particular Sadat and Shias in general, they would leave and they would flee from Iraq, from parts of Hijaz in Saudi Arabia, and go to, for example, Persia. For example, they would go to, Bukhara, which is in modern day Uzbekistan. You find Sadat that are from Bukhara. It's in modern day Uzbekistan. All of these places, for example, people moved to in order to save their belief system. The brother told me he was teaching in Kazakhstan for 5 years. He said in Kazakhstan, do you know what we have? He said in Kazakhstan, there are colonies, there are villages of Sadat, Sayyids, from the line of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, who they don't know why, but on the day of Eid, they keep a chair empty. And when you ask them, why do you keep this chair empty? They always put it there and they leave it empty. They ask them why. They said, we don't know, our parents used to do this. You and I may infer, we may think that maybe it's for the Imam. It's very possible that their ancestors used to keep it there for the Imam. But their children don't know why they do it. You and I must make sure that we convey to our next generation why we do what we do. If we don't, then we risk them not knowing. Anyway, Shaheed al-Sadr says, with respect to the darajat, one of the reasons Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may have kept our Imam hidden from us apparently is in order for him to see all the trials and tribulations that have existed in society. And it may be to give him the highest level of ibtila and test, because he is the one who is the wasi and the waris of all the anbiya. You see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated there's a tradition from our sixth Imam that says that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam also increase in terms of ibtila, in terms of trials and tests. For example, how? Amir al-Mu'mineen, the scholars say, Amir al-Mu'mineen, our first Imam, during that 25-year period where his right was usurped, his right was taken, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him that test to raise his status, to raise his level. Furthermore, with respect to Imam Hassan alayhi salam, the sulh, that test was given to raise his level. But bear in mind, what level are we talking about? I will explain in a moment. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam the ultimate test, so that on the day of Ashura, when he goes through that test, after that test, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, O Aba Abdullah, through your tawassul, we will grant everyone their hajat. Your dust of your grave is now khaki shifa. That people will gain shifa from the dust of your turba. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this to the Imam after that trial and tribulation. The Imam, the sixth Imam, was asked, do you go through test and tribulation? Do you go through ibtila to raise your status? He said, yes, but not in the way you think. He says, is it in the matters of halal and haram? The companion asked. Is it like some fiqh? You understand fiqh more or jurisprudence more? He said, woe unto you. No way. This is not about this level of ma'rifah. He says, our level of understanding and our darajat increase with respect to our ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every day our understanding of Allah increases. Imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's understanding in the eyes of the ma'soom, in the eyes of the Imam is increasing every day. How should you and I be? Where should my ma'rifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean? Meaning, if the Imam's darajah is increasing, my level must be very low. I must increase it. The Imams tell us this. With respect to the question of evil, did this question of evil lead our Imam, in particular our fourth Imam, Imam Sajjad, to leave the religion, or did it increase him in his ma'rifah? Because if anyone had a right to say that I am leaving faith, I am leaving belief, I am leaving the religion, it was this Imam. Because the fourth Imam, he saw his father butchered before his eyes. He saw his brothers butchered before his eyes. He saw not only Karbala, he saw Kufa and Sham, and he saw the travesties of Kufa and Sham. But I tell you, this Imam gives us beautiful insight on how we can live better lives as citizens of this modern world. Why? I was watching on the way back, on my flight back from the UK, I was watching a documentary. The documentary was called One Nation Under Stress, with Sanjay Gupta. And it was looking at how we as Americans living in America, we are living in a very prosperous time. We are living in a very wealthy time. Economically, we're doing very well. We may be the wealthiest nation in history. But in terms of well-being, in terms of happiness, in terms of satisfaction, in terms of so many aspects of life, we're suffering. And the argument in the documentary is, he interviews a researcher at Stanford University who wrote an interesting book entitled Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. You know, many times ulcers are induced by high levels of stress and anxiety. And so when he looked at these people for 20 years, he looked at animals, monkeys and zebras in the animal kingdom. He said, these animals are suffering from stress. I mean, imagine if there's a cheetah or a leopard or a lion or a tiger running after you, you're going to get some stress. So this response of the body in a stress response is to shut off everything except that which is essential. The body, in order to survive, of the animal, for example, will shut off everything except that which is essential to survive in order to help the zebra survive. But the researcher said that because of this response, you still find that zebras don't get ulcers. Why? They suffer for stress, but their stress only lasts 3 or 4 minutes while the animal is chasing them. After that, their stress is gone. We as Americans in a modern world, we are suffering from chronic stress, perpetual stress, time and time again, and this is killing us, quite literally. So I want to share, in light of the Imam alayhimus salam, how you and I can cope with some of the modern world. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Three things that are on the rise, or three solutions to some of the problems. We are suffering from an unprecedented level of loneliness in our societies. This mimbar must be a solution hall. It must be something that gives me solutions to our modern world. The Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam were doing the same thing in their time. They were using the time and they were using their knowledge, their divine knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help solve the problems of the people. We live in a time, in the past 50 years, the level of loneliness in America has doubled. If you look at the data from the last 50 years, people are much lonelier. And much of that has been exacerbated by social media. And many of the social commentators have said, social media has taken those who are very far and brought them near, and taken those who are near and moved them very far. Our family members, our spouses, our children, the closest ones to us, because of social media, they're not very close. Because you'll have a gathering, there's a family sitting together, everyone's on their phone. So people don't know how to interact in the real world anymore. Loneliness is on the rise. Depression is on the rise. Anxiety is on the rise. There's numerous data that has shown that in modern societies, in industrial societies, mental illness rises. I will elaborate on this another night, inshallah. Why does this happen? We need to be very mindful of this, you and I. Therefore, the Imam alayhi salam gives us some solutions. With respect to loneliness, I want to share a tradition with you that I hope we never forget. The Imam alayhi salam, who had gone through Karbala, who had gone through Kufa, who had gone through Sham, and he had gone through all the difficulties, this Imam says that if everyone from the east to the west perished, there was no one else on this planet except myself, And the only thing that I had in my hands, the Imam says, the fourth Imam, if everyone's gone and I only have one thing in my hand, the Quran al-Majid wa Furqan al-Hamid, the Imam says, I would still not feel lonely. Allahu Akbar. The Imam saying that the Quran is your companion. The Quran is your friend. The Quran is the one who gives you guidance. This Quran that you and I read, it has certain themes. In it are the themes, for example, man's relationship with God, God Almighty, man as an individual, man within a society, the trends of society, the stories of the prophets. When you begin to read all of this, you begin to realize that you're not alone. And you begin to realize the cycles of life. The Imam is saying the solution, the remedy to loneliness in our society is this solution right here, the Quran al-Majid wa Furqan al-Hamid. You know this book that sometimes we leave it on a high place, we kiss it, but we don't read it. We don't benefit from it. This is the solution, the remedy for loneliness. Furthermore, the Imam alayhimus salam after Karbala, this Imam who went through trauma, who went through all the difficulties that you and I can imagine, he dedicated his life to two things: worship and generosity. Worship. How can ibadah help us? How can our worship, salah, prayer, how can all these things help us in our lives? Dr. Benson at Harvard Medical has done extensive impact of prayer in our lives and how prayer can help us. And he has found that prayer induces something called a relaxation response. That when people pray, it lowers their blood pressure levels, it lowers their heart rate, it lowers their brain waves, it slows down the brain waves. It has so many physiological benefits. It reduces depression, anxiety. Things are reduced and benefited through prayer. Dr. Benson continues, he says, at Harvard Med, Dr. Benson says that roughly half of all of the reasons that people visit doctors in America, half of doctors' visits are due to exactly these reasons: high blood pressure, anxiety, heart rate problems, palpitations, depression, anxiety. If you pray, Dr. Benson's arguing, you can reduce half of these issues, and maybe half of the issues of why you need to go to the doctor are removed in the first place. Prayer has tremendous benefits in our lives implemented. The Imam dedicated his life to prayer after Karbala. The Imam who you and I are commemorating, his wafat, his shahada just passed a few nights ago. This Imam would pray so much. Our fifth Imam, Imam Baqir alayhi salam, says, I would see my father after Karbala worshipping and praying so much that his feet would become inflated with inflammation. And he would become white and pale. And the Imam says, the fifth Imam says, when my father would notice me looking at him, he would tell me, son, can you please, my child, can you please bring me that book, that parchment, that paper of Ali ibn Abi Talib, of our grandfather Amir al-Mu'minin. The fifth Imam said, I would bring it to him. When I would bring it to him, he would open the scroll and he would read it and he would begin to cry and he would begin to weep. And he said, who can do ibadah like Ali ibn Abi Talib? This Imam, our Imam, the fourth Imam, that on Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of Mahshar, on the day of judgment, there will be a cry about this Imam. Aina Zainul Abidin? Where is the ornament of the worshippers? He's saying, who can do ibadah like Amir al-Mu'minin? Furthermore, we're told there's a moment in time where the family of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, they thought his life was going to end because he was doing so much ibadah. Do you know who they asked to intervene? They went to Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, the companion of the Ahlul Bayt. They said, Jabir, the Imam, we think he may die, he may pass out because he's doing so much ibadah. They called Jabir. Jabir came into the masjid. The Imam was just finishing 2 units of prayer. When he was finishing his prayer, he saw Jabir. He stood up for Jabir. He met Jabir. And then they had a conversation. Salamu alaykum wa alaykum as-salam. Jabir, he said to the Imam, he said, Yabna Rasulullah, is Jannah, is paradise not made for you and your family? As in, why are you doing this much ibadah, this much worship? Jannah is waiting for you, not the other way around. The Imam says, Jabir, should I not be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Should I not be thankful to my Creator for the benefits that He's given? And Jabir, where am I and where is the ibadah of Ali ibn Abi Talib? This is the level the Imam said, a coping mechanism for you and I, ibadah, develop that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It will have benefits not only here, in the akhirah as well, and not only in the akhirah, but here as well. Worship, prayer, the science is showing it has tremendous benefits. The Ahlul Bayt have told us tremendous benefits. Furthermore, what did the Imam alayhi salam dedicate himself after Karbala? What did he dedicate himself to? He dedicated himself to generosity. Do you know how generous this Imam was? Allahu Akbar. We are told this Imam, one day he is riding on his horse and he passes by a group of people who are suffering from leprosy. They are lepers. You know the skin disease, the contagious one? In the past, what would happen is these people would be isolated and quarantined from society. They saw the Imam, they said, Yabna Rasulullah, will you join us for a meal? We're eating, would you join us? The Imam says, on his horse, he says, I would join you, but I am fasting. If I were not fasting, I would have joined you. The Imam then went home. The narration says, when Imam Sajjad got home, he told his servant, I want you to prepare a meal, a good meal for our friends when we invite them to our house. Those same lepers, the Imam said, cook a good meal. He invited them all to the house and the Imam ate with them. Do you know we have in traditions, the Imam alayhi salam, in particular our fourth Imam, he would purchase servants in a bulk amount. He would purchase them. He would then teach them, train them, clothe them, give them food, give them everything they needed and free them to go on about their ways. The Imam alayhi salam began to dedicate his life to other people. Why? Because the science is showing today that generosity can change our lives for the better. If you and I stop living a life that is purely self-centric and we change our direction, rather than focusing on me, you focus on we, it will change your life. The Imam dedicated himself post-Karbala, after Karbala, to others, to benefit society. We're told there's a moment in time. Imagine the generosity of the Imam. Allahu Akbar. The Imam, our fourth Imam, would go in the middle of the night to give charity to his loved ones, his relatives, his cousins. And you know how he would go? He would go in a way, in a state where he would cover his face in disguise. He would cover his face in disguise. And do you know when he would give the people the money, his relatives, his cousins, do you know what they would say? They say, may Allah have mercy on you, O stranger, and may Allah not have mercy on Ali ibn al-Husayn. Because Ali ibn al-Husayn didn't help us. Because the Imam alayhi salam, in broad daylight, he didn't help. But in the midst of the darkness of the night, he would help. Do you know how they found out that it was the Imam? After he died, after our fourth Imam passed away, the help stopped. Then they understood it was the Imam. They went to his grave and they began crying. Do we understand? This is a higher level of consciousness. It is my belief and the belief of scholars that the Imams, the Prophets, they came to raise our level of consciousness. Imagine, and I'm concluding in a few moments, imagine if someone comes to you at work, at school, in some environment, on the highway, and they treat you in a way that is the most disrespectful. They curse at you, they swear at you, they react to you in a way that's not befitting. How would you react? This happened to the Imam, by the way. A man came to the Imam in the middle of the city and he began to curse at him. And he began to say the worst things to the Imam. The Imam didn't say anything to him at that time. The Imam came back in the evening. And when he came in the evening, he came to the man's house. And he came with his companions. Imagine, you have said something harsh to someone. And when you say something harsh to someone, this person doesn't say anything. They come back later. Imagine. You would think that they're coming to take revenge. I'll pause here for a moment. Life is a game of consciousness. You may have heard of Plato, Aflatun. In the Hausa, there is a theory amongst the scholars that some of these Greek philosophers, in particular Aristotle, there are three great Greek philosophers: Socrates, Aflatun, and Aristotle. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. There is a theory that it's possible that Aristotle, Aristotle, or his teachers were prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How? Because they say that there were 124,000 prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't know the names of all of them. We don't know where they went. There must have been prophets who went to what we now call China, There must have been. There must have been prophets who came to what we now call India. There must have been people to Europe, for example. There must have been, because this is the adala of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we don't know their names. This is why till this day they teach Aristotelian logic and Aristotelian philosophy in the Hausa, for example. Plato, who wrote a very interesting book, he gives a beautiful allegory. Never forget this allegory. It's called the allegory of the cave. And this relates to so much of our lives. Plato says, imagine for a moment you are in a cave. And in this cave, you are locked in this cave, and you have some companions of yours with you in this cave. And your hands are tied to the ceiling, and you're facing the wall. And this is all you have known your whole life. And what you begin to see is shadows on the wall. You call them shadows. You don't know what they are. You call them reality. To you, those shadows are reality. You don't have a name for them. Plato now says, imagine for a moment that your hands get loose and you are able to leave the cave. When you begin to leave the cave, you get to the entrance of the cave, your eyes hurt because of the light. And then you go out. When you go out, you begin to see the real world. You begin to see the bazaars. You begin to see the people. You begin to see society. You begin to see everything. And you start walking, and then you realize what you thought was reality, those shadows, that's not reality. Reality is here. Reality are these people. Reality is this civilization. Once you understand this, Plato says, now imagine you go back to your cave. And when you go back to your cave, you meet your companions in the cave. And you begin to tell them, you know these things that we see on the wall, these are called shadows. That's not reality. Reality is out there. There's people out there. There's bazaars out there. There's a whole world out there. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to think you've gone crazy. They're going to think you've gone mad because they haven't seen reality. You've seen reality. Do you know who Plato was talking about, by the way? Who Aflatun was talking about? He never wrote the name, but other commentators have said he was talking about his teacher, Socrates, Socrates. Socrates was willing to drink poison because the society didn't understand him. He was trying to, they had said that you are corrupting our youth. He says, I can explain to you why I'm right, but you won't understand. Therefore, he was willing to drink hemlock, which was poison. Our analogy is exactly the same. You and I, the homework, the action item of the majlis tonight is, you and I, we are blessed with this member of Aba Abdullah and Rasulullah. We benefit from it in the nights of Muharram, in the nights of Safar. But I tell you, this is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You and I must do some homework to understand our deen. This requires dedicating time to read the Quran, dedicating time to read the books of the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt, Man la yahdurul faqih, Tahzeeb, Istabsar, Al-Kafi, these main books of hadith, reading what the scholars have said, listening to the scholars. Because when you begin to read, you will become like that person who leaves the cave and comes back. You will say, I didn't know religion was this. Now I have understood what religion actually is. You and I have some responsibilities to do. This is the level of consciousness. Coming back to the example, the Imam alayhi salam comes back to that man's house with his entourage. The man thinks he's coming to take revenge. The Imam alayhi salam says, oh man, I am here to tell you, if there's anything that you need, if you're hungry, if you're thirsty, if you need any food, if you need anything while you are here, I am at your service and I am at your disposal. How does someone get to this level? This is a level of consciousness. One can happen, for example, if I'm on the highway, using that example, if I'm on the highway, someone cuts me off, one level of consciousness, the lower level of consciousness, is right angry and upset. And I react. The second higher level of consciousness is when I begin to say, maybe he had a reason to do so. Maybe he's taking his loved one to the hospital. Maybe it's some dire circumstance. Maybe, I don't know. A third higher level of consciousness is when you begin to see society and you begin to realize that the cycles of society repeat. When you begin to see that the same arguments that people have, the problems that I have in this community are the same problems that are in the UK, that are in England, that are in Australia, that are in Canada, you start seeing the world at a 3,000, 30,000 level view when you're flying. You start seeing the world at a higher level of consciousness. The Imams were at a higher level of consciousness. The Imam knew that person used foul language on me, not because I'm bad. He used that language on me because Banu Umayyah, Muawiyah, Yazid, and their henchmen had brainwashed the people of Sham. He didn't know better. The Imam says, he doesn't know. Let me show you my akhlaq. Let me show you who I really am. This is why we're told there's a moment in time where a man is asking for food and water and shelter from the Imam. The Imam gives him his food, the Imam gives him water. The man looks at the Imam. He says, if you knew who I was, you would never give me water. The fourth Imam looks right back at him. He says, I recognized you from a mile away. You're the same one who killed my brother Aliun al-Akbar. Allahu Akbar. How does someone get to this level? He says, then why are you helping me? Why are you assisting me? He says, that was your akhlaq. This is our akhlaq. That is your ethics. This is our ethics. We don't stoop to your level. Allahu Akbar. Ajrukum ala Allah. This Imam, he saw the most difficult calamities, the most difficult circumstances. We're told that after the tragedy of Karbala in Medina, whenever they would bring water for wudu for the Imam, for him to do his ablution, for him to do his wudu, he would look at the water and he would begin to cry. And he would cry so much that that water from his tears would mix into the water. Mudaf to mutlaq, that water that's pure, it would become mixed. And they would have to get another bowl of water for the Imam. Because he would look at the water and he would face towards Karbala. He would say, Assalamu alaikum. Ya Aba Abdullah. Peace and salutations be upon you, my father, Aba Abdullah. Ajrukum ala Allah. We're told whenever, after the tragedy of Karbala, whenever the Imam used to pass the bazaar, when he would go through the bazaar and the markets, all the butchers would close their shops because they didn't want to do anything in front of the Imam. One day the Imam is passing by. We're told that when he's passing by one shop, one stall, the butcher is not able to close his shop in time. When he's not able to close his shop in time, the Imam sees him and he sees his animals and he says, oh butcher, did you give water to these animals? Did you give any food to these animals? He said, Yabna Rasulillah, we are Muslims. We give them food. We give the animals water. The Imam turned towards Karbala. He said, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. He said, peace and blessings and salutations be on you, my father Aba Abdullah. The animals get water. The animals get food. You didn't get any food. You didn't get any water. Ajrukum ala Allah. Ajrukum ala Allah. We're told that when the Imam alayhi salam, when Imam Sajjad was about to depart from this world, when he was about to leave this world, we're told at a moment in time that when he's about to leave, he tells his son Imam Baqir alayhi salam, he says, my son, put me on the ground. I don't want to lay on the bed. He said, my father, why do you want to lay on the ground? He says, I want to know what it was like for my father Aba Abdullah on Yawm Ashura. He did not have a bed. He did not have a bed. Let alone that, it was just him and the arrows that were shot on him. It was just him and this. Ajrukum ala Allah. Ajrukum ala Allah. Final narration. I won't take much of your time. This Imam who cried so much after Karbala. Why did he cry? He let his heart out. We are told after Karbala, the family went to Kufa and to Sham, and after they were released, they were going back home. When they were going back home, they had a fork in the road. One way was to Medina, one way was to Karbala. Imam Sajjad comes to Bibi Zainab. He says, my aunt Zainab, one road is to Medina, one road is to Karbala. Where shall we go? At that point in time, we are told that Bibi Zainab says, take me to Karbala. I want to mourn my brother Sayyid al-Shuhada. Ajrukum ala Allah. But this is what I wanted to share with you. On the day of Arba'een, we are told that when Imam alayhi salam, he is coming from one side, from the other side, Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, the companion of the Holy Family, is coming. They meet over the grave of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and they embrace each other, and they hug and they cry very much. But this Jabir ibn Abdullah was the first friend the Imam had seen in a long time. When he he met him. When you meet a friend after a tragedy, you tell the friend, do you know what we went through? Do you know what calamity what we went through? Do you know who we lost? Do you know what the Imam said to Jabir? He hugged Jabir. Jabir hugged the Imam. The Imam said, Jabir, do you know what happened to us on Ashura? He said, Yabna Rasulullah, what happened? He said, the calamity began on Ashura, but it didn't stop there. He said, Jabir, do you know what happened on Sham-e Ghariban? He said, what happened? He said, they gave an order that we will run horses over the bodies of the shuhada. Every single tribe said, we will not allow you to humiliate our loved ones like this. Someone from the opposition had a relative. They would pull the body away, one after the other. He said, Jabir, do you know the son of Fatima Az-Zahra was left in the middle? Jabir, they ran horses over the body of my father. Jabir, I heard his bones breaking under the hooves of the horses. Jabir, I couldn't do anything. Do you know what it's like for a son to hear his father's bones breaking and not being able to do anything? Jabir, I couldn't do anything to help him. Do you know what went through my heart, Jabir? Sallallahu alayka ya Rasul Allah. Sallallahu alayka ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima Az-Zahra Sayyidat al-Nisa al-Alamin. Sallallahu alayka ya Hasan al-Mujtaba. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. معتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين.
गरीब बेकसोलाचार मर गया सादात खाक उड़ाए के सरदार मर गया सादात खाक उड़ाए के सरदार मर गया साया रहा सरों पाना चौथे इमाम का साया रहा सरों पाना चौथे इमाम का जहरा की जा हुसैन का दिलदार मर गया जहरा की जा हुसैन का दिलदार मर गया आबिद गरीब बेकसो लाचार मर गया कांटों पर खींचते थे जिसे राहे शाम में कांटों पर खींचते थे जिसे राहे शाम में वो सारबाने इतरत अतहार मर गया वो सारबाने इतरत अतहार मर गया आबिद गरीब बेकसो लाचार मर गया शम